think we'll make a start now, and I just want to say good morning, welcome, and thanks so much to all of you for coming and joining this event today. It's lovely to see such an international group of people with a panel from New Zealand, South Africa, the UK, and participants from, I can't see exactly where our participants are from, but I'm thinking that's quite an international spread there as well. My name's Kate Birmingham. I work in the Centre for Understanding Sustainable Prosperity, or CUSP, at the University of Surrey in the United Kingdom. I'm going to start with a few words of introduction to our project, to this event, and to the team we've got gathered here today on the panel. First of all, I just want to give you some information about how we're running the session. The first thing to say is we are recording it, so please be aware of that. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom to raise any questions or comments you want to make as we go. We'll keep a tab of those. All the panellists can see them and we'll be able to pick them up at the end and discuss them. Please keep your mics and cameras turned off, but then when we come to you, if you have a question, we'll be able to turn them on then. Let me say a few words about the research centre we're working in and this research project. So CUSP is a research centre concerned with a really pressing question: what can prosperity or living well mean in a world of environmental limits? And one of our key projects in CUSP addresses this question specifically to young people aged 12 to 24 living in cities, with the aim of identifying and sharing young urban experiences and ideas for living well within environmental limits, and to understand what makes that challenging. Our project's called Cycles, Children and Youth in Cities, Lifestyles, Evaluations and Sustainability, and it's taking place in 7 really different cities: Makhanda in South Africa, Christchurch in New Zealand, Dhaka in Bangladesh, New Delhi in India, Yokohama in Japan, Sao Paulo in Brazil, and London in the UK. In each city, we've been working with teams of local researchers, and they've worked with young people using young people's own photographs of their everyday lives and their neighbourhoods, group discussions and a survey to develop understanding on what makes for living well for young people in those diverse cities. And alongside that academic research, we've been working with Amanda Blue, who's here today with us. She's an award-winning filmmaker, and she's been developing short films to provide another channel to hear and communicate young people's views and feelings about their cities and what living there well means to them. So far, Amanda's completed filming in Makhanda and Christchurch, and she's currently working on developing films in Yokohama and London. And we're going to have a chance to see previews of the films from South Africa and New Zealand in a minute. But first of all, let me introduce the team we have here today. And we have got some connectivity issues, so people might drop in and out of the panel a little bit, but we hope that'll be okay. So from Christchurch, we've got Bronwyn Hayward, who's the leader of the project and has been leading the research in New Zealand, and also Zoe Evans and Lovely Tabune, who appear in the film. From Makhanda, we've got Ingrid Schudel, who's been leading the research there, and hopefully Live Matawani, she's been on and off, and Lorna Musiwa, who've been working on that research with her, and Abongole Ndzipo, who's in the Makhanda film. Hi there. We've also got Anastasia Lukianov, who's been working with me on the research in London. And last but not least, we've got Amanda Blue, the filmmaker. So the plan for the event is we're going to watch both of the films first, and they both last about 7 or 8 minutes, so we'll watch them both. Then I'm going to ask Amanda to say a little bit about her experience of making those films and reflections on the different sorts of situations in the 2 cities, before she turns to a conversation with some of the young people who appeared in those films and ask them to reflect on how things have changed for them and for their cities, perhaps, since those films were made. And then we're going to talk a little bit to the researchers from the 2 cities to think about how the films relate to their wider understandings about young people's lives, which we've garnered from the research. And then we'll open it up to questions and comments from everybody. We definitely won't run for more than an hour and a half, and I'm really aware that it's very late and night already for some of you. So without further ado, we will now watch the film. So just give us a couple of minutes to actually set the films up, and then we should be able to sit tight and watch both of them. Thank you.
Dear Christchurch.
Dear Christchurch.
Dear Christchurch.
It's not the biggest city, but it's a nice place to be. It's so easy to be independent when you're in such a small place.
Dear Christchurch.
Dear Christchurch.
Dear Christchurch. I love the trees that I pass by. When I look into the sky, it just makes me smile. Dear Christchurch.
Dear Christchurch. Dear Christchurch. Dear Christchurch.
Dear Christchurch.
You're home to thousands that love and cherish you, taking its faults and holding onto them tightly.
I've never imagined to live in such a beautiful place like you.
Just like a mother, you cared and nurtured me from the day I was born. Christchurch welcomed me with a grey sky and a cold breeze, so I thought that this might be a boring community, but thank goodness I was wrong. Over time, your face became worn. This city, this place we call home, was torn.
I was 8 years old when the February earthquake struck in Christchurch. I remember everyone, including myself, being in a panic. While waiting for the shaking to stop, everyone started to come together.
Do we leave or do we stay? In this place where it felt like there was only destruction and decay. Our only hope was being able to pray.
Despite the hard work of the people around you to build you back up, I think the earthquake didn't just affected you infrastructurally, but also emotionally and spiritually.
You're a place of destruction, but also new beginnings.
My father was offered the job for the rebuild of Christchurch. We all came from the Philippines.
When my dad heard you needed help with the rebuild, he immediately grabbed the chance. My dad worked overseas all my life. He's not just rebuilding you, but he's also trying to build a relationship between us.
I like my own space, being alone. But I don't like the feeling of loneliness. Christchurch, you are beautiful.
Before the earthquakes, Christchurch was more just like a city that doesn't really have any cultural identity to it. There wasn't much Māori things happening. Now that they're rebuilding and they're putting in all these new cultural representations, whāriki are like mats that our ancestors used to use. They have meanings in their patterns. They've made them and they've put them all over the city. each whariki has a story to it. It's showing that we actually are Māori.
Eight years later, and we have new buildings and creative artworks all around town.
The earthquake hasn't taken away the beauty, it's only added.
You're slowly reconstructing yourself back up to rebuild what was lost from you.
We still hold tight onto the memory of the earthquakes, and we hold on to it tightly as it comforts us.
I'm a reader, but also I myself want to become a writer. But how can one hope to be a writer in a place such as this? Christchurch is a good base, perhaps a stepping stone of sorts. But to me, it's not the final destination. It's only but a starting line.
To some, Christchurch doesn't look like much. To me, it's my home and everything it holds has meaning.
I hope that very soon the people will develop the deeper relationship to each other. I believe that we can change this.
Dear Christchurch, some of us call you Ōtautahi, some of us call you home, or used to. It's been 2.5 years since disaster struck again on March 15th. I am not going to blame you for what happened. The blame lies in your history of injustices. The cruel way you were founded left scars that still show today, and on March 15th, those scars were open wounds once more. You are still my home, Ōtautahi. I still love you as I did when I wrote my first letter. But all I can say right now is that there is a lot of work to be done. I know you find it hard to change, but I can make the promise now that us rangatahi, your children, will work hard to make you the safe and inclusive place we've always dreamed you to be. Ngā mihi, Imedia.
Dear Christchurch.
Dear Christchurch.
Dear Christchurch.
Dear Christchurch.
Dear Christchurch.
Dear Makhanda. Dear Makhanda.
Dear Makhanda. No one can resist the beautiful sunrises that shines bright early in the morning to show us the bright day that is ahead of us.
Dear Makhanda.
Dear Makhanda.
Dear Makhanda. I love how the place is. And it has a lot of friendly people. There are people in the community you can trust and that you can count on. But it also has problems like any place. Makhanda's problems are different than others.
Dear Makhanda. Dear Makhanda.
Dear Makhanda.
Dear Makhanda.
Dear Makhanda.
Dear Makhanda. Makhanda is a very nice place, but because of this water crisis is not nice enough.
The water crisis is not only creating insufficient water to drink, but it is also affecting our hygiene.
We really struggle. Everything we do involves water.
Water is life. How can we bath, cook, wash clothes and dishes?
The municipality should be more responsible by providing us with tanks. I'd like it to change.
Our land is polluted because there are dumping sites everywhere, and we're also facing problems with air pollution. So what we breathe in is not healthy. I think I should start encouraging people not to dump in their own environment, but look at a better option to dump their dirt. I would like to look into a campaign to stop our people from dumping everywhere. And I would like to ask the municipality to give us dumping bins.
This life-threatening issue should come to an end so that we can give our future generation a legacy that everyone would be proud of.
Many children are doing drugs. Children get peer pressure from their big brothers or friends. There are gangs that ask people money because they want drugs and alcohol. There are no parks for children to play for keeping them busy.
People here are sometimes very mean. People kill each other for money, alcohol, and also food.
The community doesn't help each other because we all fear that the criminal is someone close to us. Every girl cannot go outside at night. Girls are endangered. They might get raped or killed. Nothing for us is safe. Everything is at risk.
Every year there's child trafficking. Sometimes our parents don't allow us to go to school because they're scared that we might not come back.
I feel disappointed looking at the state of my beloved city. It makes me want to cry.
This has made our streets dangerous. Our parents are scared to let us be adventurous. We want to be active and explore. I think this could change if we had youth hubs, parks, clubs, and children's dreams.
Let's love, let's live, let's be together. Let's talk and let them know that it's forever. You everything I need.
As a person who believes in the power of education, I sure do like the fact that you are a specialized town and your main function is education.
When I grow up, I want to be a chartered accountant. I love numbers.
I believe that the youth of Makhanda is the future of Makhanda. I want to do psychology. I just want to study the minds of the youth. I just want to know how they think.
I love communicating with different people who had different cultures. I also feel happy here because I learn different languages.
Most people will change because of going to church. It is so important.
People died from hunger.
That's why I'm proud to be in the church I am in, because we help those people.
When people don't have food, they ask their neighbors to help them. The ones who go to church, they give them food, shelter to help them. They are so kind and they support each other. I can see that Makhanda is changing to being good from bad.
I'm grateful for all the community programs that take place in trying to help.
The only thing I want from Makhanda is for its youth to be more motivated and inspired to change their lives.
People make their own future. You decide your own future. When I become the first female president of South Africa, Makhanda will be my first priority. There'll be no more illegal dumping sites, no more water shortage, and homes for everyone.
I love being here at Makhanda. I wish people can take care of you.
Sometimes I wish I could leave Makhanda, but when I think of the memories I made here, I think of the ones I'll have when I stay here.
I only hope and yearn for your flaws and imperfections to perfect for the sake of us, your children.
Thank you very much, Amanda. It was fantastic to see those two films together like that. And I wonder if you could sort of start us off by saying a little bit about the process of making the films, some of your reflections on what was similar for you and what was different, what struck you about making those films in the two cities.
Hi, sure thing. Hi, everyone. Well, I suppose fundamentally the most important thing for me was to find a sort of simple way of allowing the films to be very much about the voices of the young people, so that it was their stories, it was their thoughts and feelings, and that they were unfiltered, and that there wasn't an agenda on my part. So coming up with the idea of asking them to write a letter to the city was the kind of, and it took me a while to work out a simple way to do that. But once I landed on that, I felt like that was it really, because actually if it's even different to being interviewed, because it really is just their voices. And so that allowed us to have quite a varied, what young people were concerned about would vary dependent upon all sorts of things. So I thought once that idea was central to the piece, then it was kind of relatively simple, and actually going into any environment, it allows the individual to kind of have agency and have their views heard. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing was being able to capture those young people in their own environment. So around the city they live in their homes, or doing things they like doing, or just like, because we didn't have much time ever, really. We only had, once we record the letters, which is just done, with sound and no camera really, it's just to capture their voices. It's really a matter of having a few hours or on a weekend or an afternoon to just be with the young people. And I think that was that marrying those two things then was sort of, I think, quite powerful, and I hope it feels truthful and authentic and real to them, and captures then some of the bigger problems or the bigger dreams or the bigger ideas about living well, or what's at stake for them. So they're like taking their own specific small, their own individual lives, and then with the power of various voices, I think it turns into a bigger picture about a particular place. So yeah, I mean, it was as simple as that really. The hardest thing really is finding young people to come forward and talk. In New Zealand, there were less people available, young people, and in South Africa, in Makhanda, everyone, it seemed, much more open, and young people were, many people wanted to be heard and wanted to write their letters and wanted their voices to be part of this film. So that was exciting. And I think we got a really strong cross-section. I think there's a reticence always to be filmed. So that's always tricky when you're doing something that's documentary like, especially when you don't have a long lead up time to get to know people really well.
Thank you very much. So we've got here today 4 of the young people who appeared in those films. So it's interesting hearing you talk about that sort of challenge of getting people to participate, and also the real task of writing that letter, because listening to it today, watching the films, that was what really struck me in a way. It's very different to our interviews, because the young people are talking to their city. They're not talking about their city. They're addressing the feelings. It's much more kind of personal and direct, and also that sense of seeing you and hearing you actually in place is really strong, which is a real kind of compliment to any other kind of research we've done. So I just want to, maybe we'll start with the young people from New Zealand. So we've got Lovely and Zoe with us, and that film obviously was made in 2019. And you're talking a lot in it about the kind of impact of the earthquakes, how things have changed, and the kind of cultural and sort of spiritual impact almost of that kind of shock to the city and the rebuilding. And then obviously at the end, there's, we talk about very briefly about the attacks on the city, which has been clearly another major shock and trauma. And you've all grown up quite a lot since the filming was made. And I wonder if you could both say a little bit about how you feel now about your city and what makes for living well there for you, and what the challenges are, what you see as the big issues still. So maybe Lovely, do you want to start?
I think for me, first of all, since that film was made, when we were when we heard about the film, about the project, I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a cool idea to join. But then I didn't really know what to expect about the whole process of filming it. And I was just 15 when we were filming it. Now I'm 18 and graduating high school. There's a huge differences now if I were to write a second letter to Christchurch, especially with the attitude, maybe, because back then I'm the introverted young girl, and now the city Christchurch has changed me a lot in terms of my personality and my dreams and my mindsets, with the issues that the youth is currently facing right now. For me, I think is just having that place to be a youth, to be themselves, because I think that's what we are needing right now. And when we saw the South African film as well, I think for us, for most youth, especially in my generation, I think we were forced to become adults because of the issues in the world, like the many struggles that we are facing. And with that, we are just forced to become adults right away, and we didn't have time to enjoy our youth because there's so much going on and we didn't have time to process everything. So yeah, if I were to write a letter for Christchurch again, I would hope that Christchurch would be a better place, and it is being a better place, because if it's not, I wouldn't change from that 15-year-old girl, to just have that safe place for children, really, for them to be children.
Thank you. I think that's a really, really strong, clear thing to say. Thank you for that. Zoe, do you want to add your reflections?
Sure. I definitely think a lot has changed in myself and in Christchurch. I don't even honestly remember writing my letter. Like it was quite a surprise listening to it a few weeks ago and going, oh yeah, I remember that. But because Amanda wasn't here when the mosque attacks happened, so she didn't really get to experience how like Christchurch comes together. Like that's something I'm so proud to be a part of, is in the Christchurch community we all like come together and like it sticks for a few years, like, and then it just kind of disbands slowly. So it's kind of calming down now that like COVID's here and stuff. It's kind of just settling down a bit, and yeah, there's so much that's changed. I could talk about so much, but covering the main things that I think are still challenges. Like, I'm in university, my first year of university now, and just being that step higher than high school, I think I've come to learn a lot more about challenges as a teenager, young adult, especially having 3 younger sisters as well. It's quite interesting to see their point of view as well. I actually have quite a list, but I'm not going to put all of them because it's going to be too long. But obviously COVID is a big thing, like students having time off school, not being able to see each other, interact as much. And I think that's giving students and kids, like, the best I can describe it is social anxiety. Like, they're not growing up like everyone else used to. It's like all social media now. That's how we interact and communicate with. And like, that's a good thing in certain spaces, but at the moment I feel like it's kind of just destroying real communication in Christchurch at the moment, especially with the younger students as well. And then that rolls along with like mental illness. It's quite a big thing in Christchurch. It's just, yeah. That I'm not going to say anymore, otherwise I'll go on for like 20 minutes.
It's fine. It's really great to hear you. I mean, what really strikes me is, the transition. We often talk about the sort of transition to adulthood, or, growing up, and it's challenging in any situation. But you're talking about situations in which there have been, multiple kinds of shocks externally, things kind of changing, which make those situations, you just cannot imagine them. You couldn't imagine living through those attacks and living through COVID, which has been kind of a shock and a real kind of trauma and transition for people all over the world, and to be a young person living through those things, as you're growing up as well, it's it's
kind of weird because it's normal to me. Like, I've grown up with that, and it's like a part of me now, and it's like, oh yeah, I was in an earthquake, and like whenever I like feel a little earthquake, I'm just like, oh. And then if somebody else is here, they're like, oh my god, it's an earthquake. And it's like so weird that people can have so many different like perspectives or something just from where they live and their experiences in a certain place.
Yeah.
One thing I was going to say that like I remember at the time thinking of it, it's really now hearing everyone talk, it was, looking at Christchurch from the outside, which, compared to Makhanda is a kind of, more privileged, the infrastructure's excellent, all of that stuff. But it looks like, so on this outside, it's this kind of, white picket fence world. But you couldn't get away from all of those young people I met. The earthquake was so central to their childhood. Like, their narrative came out from this cataclysmic natural event. And every single one of you wrote about it. And whether it was because Lovely and some of the girls that came from the Philippines came because of the earthquake. And so even their experience of it was post the earthquake, whereas, you girls were there whilst it happened. And even though it didn't define you, it was something that was bigger than you, that you couldn't get away from, that was just part of how you experienced growing up. And as you watched your city rebuild around you, and then this other thing happens that's yet another external man-made tragic event. It's really, and every city has different things, but it's really interesting that they've had these quite big things in this, what is a tiny, seemingly, honestly, the most kind of looking like it's the most sort of innocent place. And I just found myself, the letter at the end that Amira writes, I found myself crying again, because her, and with her, her Maori descendancy and everything, being able to connect back to the way that this place was founded was so cruel, and the wounds just keep getting opened up. It's a bit like Australia, where I'm from. You can't get away from that past. And it's not saying that because of that past, that's why earthquake happens or terrorism or any of those things. It's just there is a sort of connection, and I think it's really powerful. And then and as you say, Zoe, you're all just growing up within it. It doesn't have to define you or anything like that. But hearing you say you're all 3 years older, that's like 15 to 18. It's like so much changes, like in terms of who you are and all those things. I can really see it in both of you. And it would be fascinating if we had all the resources in the world to do another letter and another, because it would be really different. And I think the biggest thing that's changed, and Zoe's touching on it, is mental health. I think mental health feels like around me in London, every girl, every boy who's, you know, been in lockdowns, everyone's struggling. I don't know a family that hasn't got a teenager having that issue, you know, that's coming into their homes in some way. So, I mean, that feels different from 3 years ago.
And let me just say, like, mental illness is not necessarily just teenagers. It's like,
no, of course,
everyone. It's just such a big issue in New Zealand itself. It's huge.
Thank you very much. Let's turn now to Abongile and Mfundo, who appeared in the South African film. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about your letters to your city, how you felt about writing them, and perhaps what you'd write in a letter now. So maybe Abongile, could you start?
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So when I wrote my letter, I remember it was in 2019, right? Yeah. So I had so much that I was hoping for, you know. So a lot of things that I wanted to change, you know, in our city. And I think some of them have changed, and we're in a process of going through the change, you know. Some things are changing as we're speaking, and yeah. And I'm still
say a little bit about those things you think are changing.
Oh, okay. So firstly, in terms of how we live, you know, people now are getting a little friendlier, if I can say. People are friendly, and we've made a decision, you know, of that. For instance, in our society, there's a lot of crimes that are happening. So we've decided that in terms of making, you know, to make those crimes a little lesser. So we've created groups of people that watch the society, if I may say that. You know, people that are looking after society. Yeah. And also personally, I've grown myself because I would say that I've developed a lot of self-esteem, you know, if I may say, and also my way of thinking and seeing things, you know, it's different from back then. You know, it has developed. Yeah.
So that's really interesting. So you're talking about that kind of, some of that change coming from the community and people coming together to make change they want to see.
Yes.
And for you, when you say that you've changed, you talked about the hopes you had back in 2019. What would you say that the hopes you have are now?
Okay, so what's happening is that I was hoping that we would have some groups in our society whereby we were able to, for instance, okay, I started a youth campaign, right? Its aim is for young people to come together and connect in the name of healing. I want us to heal from things that we're suffering from, since there are depressions, anxieties, and everything. So I've decided that I want young people to connect, right? And also I want us to create a safe space where we're going to be able to sit and address these issues and find a way forward on how we can live, you know, and how we can find a solution to them. So yeah.
That's really fascinating. Mfundo, could you add something? Could you say a little bit about your letter and the letter you might write now?
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Since writing my letter, things have changed in Makhanda for the better. I have grown since writing my letter, and one highlight of my growth was this year I was able to cast my vote in the local government elections. That was a huge thing for me because now I could affect change in this democracy of ours. And also, service delivery, which is a huge problem in Makhanda, has kind of changed, and that had to happen when the whole of Makhanda had to go on strike to basically stop everything in South Africa for the municipality to listen to us, and that happened all of Makhanda came together, of which that was also a proud moment as the person of Makhanda. Yeah, things have changed for the better. For instance, the water issue is still there. It hasn't been eradicated, but now we find that water gets stopped for one day and then the next day it's back on the tapes. Other than before, it would like go on. We would not have water for like 3 days in a row. So I could say that has kind of like changed. And also and just to touch on what Zoe said about the pandemic, for me, the pandemic it stole great moments for me. When I read the letter, I was 18, and now I'm 20 in my second year of university. Last year was my first year in university. Now the pandemic kind of like put a stop on everything, so I could not get the full entire experience of my first year at varsity, and I kind of like it stole those moments. And I also think it's not. I don't think it's only me who feels that way. Many other people, even if it's not like for university, but some moments that were going to be shared last year in 2020 were just stolen by COVID. So yeah, I think that's it for me.
That's really interesting. Can you just give us a little bit more kind of context about that strike you mentioned, that sort of sense of the city coming together collectively? Okay. What was that about, and what did it achieve?
So the roads were in a bad state on top of the water issues. And then the taxi industry, which is like the huge, I think it's after the CBD, it's the next industry that is huge, was like they were like they've had enough, and they unionized with the public, because they were complaining that since the roads are bad, they spend a lot of money on fixing their taxis, like tires, windshields, and then they were like saying we're losing money because of this thing that the municipality could fix, and also but the public was also had enough. So it was a week-long strike. Honestly, it started on Monday. What I appreciated about the strike, there was no violence like against people. It was just that they stopped movement around the town. They blockaded entrances from our neighboring towns. They put on barricades, and they were like, this is the only way we can be listened to. And the government officials from the high up government actually came down to Makhanda and were like, what are your concerns? They actually had a meeting with the representative from the strike, and from there, then change started to happen. And also before that, the municipality was taken to court by the people of Makhanda. People wanted the municipality to dissolve, basically to start afresh, to hire competent people. But then that has not happened. But then because of the strike, things have changed for the better.
That's great. So brilliant. Yeah, really, really strong. So, and was there all types of people, all age ranges? Like, was it all aspects of the community?
It was. I would say it was mainly the Black people of town, because they were quite most affected. But then the shocking thing for me was that the white people of the town who lived in the suburban parts, they also were with us. We were all in the one spirit of the town needed to change. And what they did, they were, since there was no movement in town, like any activity, no one was going to school, no one was going to work. Everyone in town was actually did the same thing. They stayed away from their work. Children were not sent to school. So that was kind of that showed that we're all in solidarity with the cause.
It's really powerful. Did that make you feel like you can, that's possible to change things, that experience?
It was one moment that was like, okay, when people come together for a worthy cause, whether you are old, young, because it was all people of all kinds, they came together, and that was quite a nice thing to see, that change can happen if we want it to happen.
That's great.
It's really fascinating to hear you two talk, and to hear Lovely and Zoe talk, and that there's that there are some such different contexts, but there's some kind of similar issues you're both talking about both in the films and as we hear you today. And what I'd like to do now, I mean, and please, you know, lovely Zoe, Bongole and Makhanda, come back into the conversation. But what I'd like to do now is turn to the researchers who worked with young people in the cities, looking at their photographs in discussion groups and in a survey, as well as with the filmmaker. And to say a little bit about how these kinds of observations and reflections in the films relate to some of the wider things that you found out in the research about what makes for living well for young people in your cities. So can I turn first of all to Ingrid and Lorna and Live to say a few words about Makhanda and what they found in that research and how it relates to the film.
Thanks, Kate. Live, I wasn't sure if you wanted to lead from your side.
Hi, am I audible?
You are.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. First to say thank you to Amanda and her team and all the young people who made the docu a reality, guys. It's lovely to see and hear young people speak and share how they see the place that they live in and how they experience the place that they live in. It's a privilege, so thank you for that. Yes, I think the docu really represents what we also found in the study in terms of what we discussed as young people in the focus group discussions. And I think I want to highlight two things. One, youth agency. It's like been our favorite finding to see and hear and witness that young people really want to be part of decision making. They really want to be part of, I say they because the scope of the study was 18 to 24. So anyone confused from South Africa why I'm not identifying as a young person, I'm above the age. The scope here is up to 35, but so yeah, that's a bit weird, but yeah, sure. We want to be part of decision making. We want to be able to impact and influence positive change with things that influence us and things that influence other people. One of the things that was discussed in the focus groups was the drug issue that was also reflected in the docu. And young people from one particular group were like, it would be great if we not only had rehab facilities, which is something that they would like to see changed, that they may perhaps not be able to immediately produce or manifest, but we could also do street art dialogues where we talk about these things and make sure that conversations are actually happening around these issues in our community, so people understand we're not just doing drugs as young people because we like drugs or whatever. There are actual issues, traumas, things that young people are facing that are driving them to pursue drugs and alcohol in terms of abuse. So yeah, youth agency and youth thinking from an individual perspective, what can I do? And from a community perspective, what can be done by people around me within my community as well? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting, and it does tie really well with what Bongole and Makhanda were talking about as well. Ingrid, do you want to add anything? Any reflections from the research?
Yes, but it's just been a very interesting process. We have done these intensive focus group discussions with the youth where they collected and took photographs and spoke to those. We did then a quantitative survey, and it's really and that was the research, and then the idea of the film, evolved from there. So looking back at some of the data, it's just very interesting to see how poverty and concerns about money, for example, were things that came through very strongly in the survey. And yet there's still an incredible amount of positivity amongst the youth, so even though you can see from the film and you can see from the survey around anxiety around money, etc., that is an issue, but the positivity around education and the possibilities for education, the positivity around agency, as Liva has said, were very encouraging. And yes, also what Mfundo said around how Makhanda has recently come together with collective agency is something that was perhaps even missing when we did our survey. The sense amongst the youth that they wanted to do things as individuals but didn't have much faith in the collective community being able to come together. And since then, Makhanda certainly proved itself in that sense. So that was wonderful to see. Yes, and also, the research also gave, especially the focus groups, gave some beautiful insights into some of the ways that people make things work, make their lives work, the special things in their lives, the special Sunday lunches with the 7-color meal, the ways that they creatively find, if parks and opportunities are not given for them to go and exercise or come together, they make plans, they find opportunities to get together. So there's an incredible creativity that came through in that research, which was lovely to see. Yes, but thank you very much, Amanda, for the film, and thank you so much to the youth. And I think I said it in the chat, but that incredible, that difficulty of being honest about your difficult situations, but that creativity in the face of these difficulties is fantastic to see. So thank you. I'm not sure if Lorna wants to have
definitely. Thanks, Ingrid. That's really fascinating, thoughtful. Lorna, you were involved in the research too. It'd be great to hear some of your thoughts about it.
Yes, thank you. Like what both of my researchers has said, if we look at I was also looking at the main research which I was doing for my master's, and one of the things that also came out is about agents. As the youth looking at their matters, what matters to them, looking at the water shortage, looking at the roads, which are transport and mobility, and also looking at the leisure and communication. Youth, they did not have areas where they would go and enjoy themselves. Like they had some, and there some areas where they would go, but because of they were young, they would be taken advantage of, whereby the older people would come in and take over the equipment that they will be using. This was one of the things that youth had to do, and some of them they had to improvise, to use their homes as to entertain themselves. They would have to make the equipment for them to make them enjoy whatever they need to do. And then on the other thing again, on agents, what they did, they tried, during my research, they did a vegetable garden, but because of these matters of concern, water shortages, the garden could not flourish because of the water shortages, and it was very severe, as it would go for days, 2 weeks, days without water. So that garden could not survive because of that. But otherwise, soon after these strikes, like what Mfundo said, they used to have, like the Eco Club at my school, they have started to rebuild, starting a vegetable garden. so that they would sustain themselves. They would have vegetables which they could take home, and also they would have vegetables to have soup for them during their lunch. So it's some of the things that the youth are trying to take in for them to make sure that at least there is a matter of urgency which is being done by the youth. Most of them, because of this health, mental health, it also affected them because of this COVID. They couldn't go out, and most of their activities were disturbed during this pandemic. So it also affected them to start now to try and look at what needs to be done for them to stand up and start as youth to speak and say whatever they want to do about their community.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really interesting. And it struck me as you were talking how some of those things resonated with what Lovely and Zoe were talking about earlier, about the need for places for children and young people to be children and young people, and the importance. Really interesting. Thank you. Can I come to you now, Bronwyn? First of all, just to talk a little bit about Christchurch itself before we maybe talk about the project as a whole. So I know many of these themes about agency and democracy and collective action are really close to your heart and young people's place in that. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about your findings specifically from the research in Christchurch and how that relates to the reflections in the film today.
Kia ora, thanks, and thanks everybody. It's been a wonderful project to both be part of and lead, and I'd really want to thank you, Kate Birmingham, for hosting us today, and Tim Jackson and Amanda for the work you've done. It's terrific, and for the students. So from the Christchurch perspective, and I'm really sorry that my colleague, Dr. Kate Prendergast, can't be with us. She is literally having a baby and adding to the city's numbers tonight. So that's exciting. But we were thinking about many things. The whole study is thinking about how can we support children and young adults to live well in sustainable limits at a time of great change. And when we hosted the first film in Christchurch, Alania, who isn't able to be here tonight, said, you know, one of the things that was striking about Christchurch was that our kids are not all right, but they are extraordinary. And that's the same for all of the cities and the stories, because there are 7 cities that we're working with. But as Alania said, what happens when extraordinary runs out? And so they're thinking about how we support children and young adults at a time of both, as we've said, external shocks and endemic injustices that are so varied. And when you see another person's city and you see what they're coping with, it is very striking how much people are coping with. While, as Lovely says, we're also just growing up. Or as Zoe says, it's my home and everything it holds has meaning. So I think one of the things that's been most disturbing for me as a political scientist working on climate change and working on democratic rights is that despite a huge number of volunteering events after the earthquakes here in Christchurch and a huge number of student solidarity events after the mosque attacks, and then again the students came together during COVID to help elderly in communities get food and get the kind of support they need, when we surveyed people, they still don't feel that they can affect change. And also a staggering number, very small number, about 40% of our community feels that they've got someone they can turn to for help. And these are really serious issues. And I think what brings it into relief is when you can tell a story that also lets people talk in their own words and explores this story. And so that added layers of meaning that comes from film adds a whole level of ways of thinking about this. And we talked with Amanda about, is this going to be co-produced? Is it going to be led by young people? It's 10 years ago since I stood on the bridge in the middle of a student demonstration in London when they'd removed the Living Alone Fund, and I rang Amanda, having seen her beautiful film, The Big School Lottery, and the way in which she lets children talk with dignity, and said, would you be interested in working alongside a research team with very little money? And I think that's one of the things that's made the project so special as well, which we might talk about more broadly, is the love that everyone has put into this from across all of their cities.
Thank you, Bronwyn. I'm going to come back to you in just a minute, just to say a few things maybe about the whole Cycles project, but I just wanted to also bring in Anastasia, who's been, as you mentioned, London, who's been doing our Cycles research with young people in London. And I just wondered, Anna, some of the things we've heard today about the issues for young people in Makhanda and South Africa, the things they hope for, the things they find challenging, how do those relate to some of the things you've heard from young people in Lambeth?
Hi everyone. First, I just want to say it's incredible to see the films, and it's really, really great to have Amanda here, as well as the young people who took part in it, talk about the experience of doing that. But just in relation to London, I think it's really interesting because there are definitely concerns that young people have that resonate across the different cities. Safety is one that comes back a lot. I feel like it's something that manifests in different ways across the 3 different cities. So for instance, in Lambeth, like in Makhanda, it is something that is fairly gendered as well. We have young women talk about safety issues in terms of going out on the streets, particularly at night. But you also have mental health is also one that comes back a lot across the 3 cities, I think. And air pollution is another one that came back a lot to Lambeth, which resonates with Makhanda, I think. But at the same time, there are things that link Lambeth a lot to Christchurch, like the green spaces. I think all of the young people who took part in our survey were talking about how happy they were to have those green spaces and how that was something that really, really was a big benefit of the city. So yeah, I think those were kind of the things that really jumped out at me when I was watching the films, and I'm really looking forward to see those things come up on screen really and be manifested in the film, because it's one thing to see survey responses from young people, but it's a very, very different thing, as Bronwyn said, to have actually it built and knit into stories that represent young people's actual lives in their city.
Thank you. We're going to come to attendees in a minute and see if people have any kinds of questions or comments for anyone on the panel. But I just want to come back to you briefly, Bronwyn. I mean, we are in the context of COP at the moment, and we've always wanted this project to be a project that makes a mark, and I'm sure it will. But what would you say is the kind of main message that you'd want to give from Cycles, from these young people's voices in cities? What do you think is the kind of key thing to say at this point?
Half the world's children are living in cities. Well, most of the world's children now are living in cities. Sorry, half the world is in cities. Cities drive our climate. They drive our climate emissions. The choices that these young citizens in cities are making, and the choices that are thrust on them, that they don't get really to exercise a lot of control over their infrastructure and the conditions they're in. This is shaping huge cohorts of populations. It's not surprising that cities have been where we've seen the climate strikes, but we've seen the strikes and the solidarity of young people across all of our study in different ways. So in Dhaka, it isn't the climate strike that's produced the most enthusiasm, but like Makhanda, it's been an issue about transport and the solidarity of the student schools protest to get better public transport, where young people came onto the streets bravely against really significant policing, has been, and harsh retribution, has been quite remarkable. And I think we have one generation to get this right, but this will be a multi-generational struggle, because as the lovely Robert Bollard, the founder of Environmental Justice, says, this isn't a sprint. This isn't a marathon. It's a relay marathon where we are supporting from one generation to the next, building the conditions to make effective change. But what's fascinating about this period of living in is that we're also living through not just huge social and economic and environmental change, but a real change in how young people around the world are seeing themselves. So we've gone from this individual neoliberal story of I can make a difference, which is almost a mantra that's been really held up still in the media with a focus on Greta as an individual, but she actually comes from a tradition, even within Sweden, of social collective action. And what young citizens around the world are learning, citizens in the broader sense of belonging and participating, is how to make that collective change that Mafundo's talking about, that feeling of coming together to affect change. And as a political scientist, I'm so grateful, Mafundo, you said about getting the vote to affect change. But a lot of our other studies spinning off from this relate to these issues about how do we support people to feel that sense of agency, that ability to imagine and affect change collectively in a sustained way. And that's why I thank Amanda and the students for sharing their stories to start to bring these kind of experiences really sharply into focus.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. Thank you. Okay, I wonder now if there's any questions or thoughts or comments or anything anybody would like to say from the attendees. We haven't got any questions as such, just a couple of comments about how good it is to hear reflections from young people in the Q&A. So I just wonder if has anyone got any questions or thoughts they'd like to raise? Well, maybe we will be able to let you go slightly early. I should say that I should have said this up front. This research and the film was made possible by funding from the UK Economic and Social Research Council, for which we're hugely grateful. And this event today is part of the ESRC's Festival of Social Science, which is it's a chance to kind of celebrate the kind of the work we were able to do as social scientists, but also to try to bring it to a wider population. And it's been really delightful to be here today with this kind of diverse group of participants, to hear from young people themselves, and to be able to kind of share some of our thoughts about our research and the film with everyone who's here today. So thank you all very much for attending, and it's been a pleasure to be with you today. So I think, unless anyone has anything really pressing they want to say, we'll end the event now. We do have a web page. Catherine, can you just put the link to the Cycles web page in the Q&A? And we're currently producing some short flyers with which kind of cover summaries of our research in each of the cities, and those will be available on the Cycles webpage very shortly. So if people want to kind of learn more about the project, there's already information there, but we're going to have some more fresh kind of results from our survey available for everybody to see really soon. So there you go. The link is now there in the Q&A for people to click on or copy. And now I'd just like to say farewell. Thank you, and hope you have a good night's sleep if you're in New Zealand, and a good day to those of you in South Africa and the UK. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye, and thanks, everyone.
And thank you, all you young people, for taking part in the films. I meant to say that early on, sorry. I mean, if I haven't said it before, the films don't exist without your beautiful letters and your thoughts and your openness. And so I can't thank you enough, because they're really, they don't exist without you, all of you. So thank you.